to Professor Mark Silverman and Professor Aparna Dharwadkar for making it possible for me to be here. Not only through their invitation, but also through their scholarly work. Their work made me understand the meaning of the phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. I appreciate Rini Tarafdar's help with logistics and innumerable questions about my visit. So my larger book project is called Staging Skepticism, a study of Ibsen's theatre in India. However, I am not here to talk about my more extensive project. I will focus only on one chapter of my study, and this chapter documents the first production of any of Ibsen's plays in India. A travelling theatre troupe from Britain, the Achurch-Charrington company, introduced Ibsen to India by producing a doll's house on 26 December 1891 in Calcutta. En route to England from Australia, the Achurch-Charrington company, hereafter I will call this company as AC Company, visited the British colony of India, where their audiences consisted almost entirely of Europeans and a small percentage of educated native elites such as the Parsis. Despite the AC Company's brief visit of around 2 months, they offered an extensive repertory of plays such as Forget Me Not, Camille, and The Merchant of Venice. However, the crown jewel of their tour was undoubtedly Ibsen's A Doll's House. Charrington, you see Charrington is on the right, Charles Charrington, the husband of Janet Achurch. Popular lecture on Ibsen's and over 100 performances of Ibsen's plays in Australia and New Zealand played a considerable role in establishing the Charringtons in Australia and New Zealand as Ibsenites, ardent believers in Ibsen's political aesthetics and experts on Ibsen. Thus, the AC Company's arrival in India paved the way for canonizing Ibsen by introducing a nuanced and balanced version of the Norwegian playwright. So Janet Achurch on one side and Charrington on the other side. You would have noticed that credits I have given to Museum of Drugs. The reason behind it is that towards the end of her life, Janet Achurch was dependent on morphine. In fact, she died of morphine poisoning. So, and it's very difficult to locate pictures of Janet Achurch, especially the first one. So I found it only in the Museum of Drugs. Now, before I explore this production, the one which I am talking about, 26 December 1891 production, the first production, I will take a couple of minutes to highlight the meaning of skepticism, not within the context of Henrik Ibsen, but in the context of South Asian theatres in general and Indian theatres, not theatres in particular. I stumbled upon this meaning while chatting with the students and colleagues, especially non-South Asians, whether they are in Australia or in the US. Despite their deep love for South Asian theatres, they take a step back when it comes to researching these performances. One reason which stopped them, as I learned, is they often find them overwhelming, probably because of the interplay of languages, cultures, and history of colonization. So the ultimate aim of this presentation, my presentation, is to ignite the fire by telling you that you are not alone. I also want to emphasize that sometimes the direct consequence of being overwhelmed is falling in love with the literature you engage with, as it happened in my case when I started engaging with 19th century literature. So today's talk is a lover's discourse on Ibsen's aesthetic and its dissemination in British India. Now, having said that, let me come to why Ibsen now. And the best way to begin this discourse is to ask, why Ibsen? And I'm asking this question why, and there are two whys here. First regarding my own project's rationale, that why did I decide to go for Ibsen? And second, why Ibsen in 19th century British India? So in the first part of my talk, and I call this first part as the demand, I will focus on the demand for Ibsen's aesthetics. In 2017, British Indian writer Tanika Gupta jokingly claimed the legacy of Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen for India when she humorously argued that Ibsen is Indian. Her contention ingeniously built upon an Indian joke, more precisely a Bengali one, when she read "sane" in Ibsen as a suffix to ib, thus making sane the last name of Ibsen. She connected Henrik to Bengal, where the last name sane is a common occurrence. Jokes apart, Ibsen is one of India's most produced European playwrights. Ibsen's impact on India can be understood by quickly looking at the words of M.K. Rana, an Indian theatre director. According to him, and these are the words, there is some production or other. So, despite a considerable number of Ibsen's adaptation in India, we continue to overlook Ibsen's early productions in British India. This neglect is evident in how projects related to Indian Ibsens are carried out. I know some of you have already read some of these essays about Indian Ibsens, and probably I will end up challenging a little bit of these essays. These projects wittingly or unwittingly failed to document early Ibsen's productions in India, participating in nationalist amnesia to deny European writers their due place in making modern Indian theatre. An emphasis on Ibsen's aesthetics in 19th century Europe or late 20th century India offers only half of the picture. Second, these productions by the AC Company, Achurch-Charrington Company, show that the British Empire was not a single monolithic concept, but a plural identity shaped by translocal conditions. To have a comprehensive view of Ibsen's poetics, we need to explore Ibsen's spread in the colonies. To understand this dissemination, I build upon Tracy Davis's methodology introduced in her work, Economies of the English Stage. First, like Davis, I don't see the idea of the stage limited only to the theatre, but I also include other non-theatrical shows like circuses, wrestling matches, phonograph exhibitions as part of the larger stage spectrum. Second, my approach is not to write history by focusing only on performance aesthetics, but to see what made these performances possible. That is, how middle-class managers survived financially in the colonies and how decisions about finances changed the performance aesthetics. Now let me come to the second why. So this is the first why is my project's rationale. Now let me come to the second why Ibsen in 19th century India. That is why there was a demand for Ibsen in 19th century India. Early 19th century pictures, and this is one of those pictures of Englishmen in India, show them in Indian clothing. You can see complementing their clothing was their love of Indian hookahs. The first one on your left is an 1830 hand-painted engraving from a British painter and lithographer, Henry Heath. The engraving beautifully captures the world of India and British policy of integration through the caricatures of these two English gentlemen. An upright Georgian gentleman smokes his long-stemmed clay pipe on the left, while the gentleman on the right puffs away on his hookah in a relaxed and carefree way. One can notice that smoking is a new way here. So you can see here it says a new way here, and the old way was the English way. Okay, and the new way is different from English pipes. The second engraving on the right hand side from 1835 shows an Englishman wearing an Indian dress. You see, I really like his Indian shoes, smoking hookah and perhaps responding to the Muslim greeting of salam. These pictures offer a brutally candid depiction of how the British tried to culturally integrate themselves into the new climate of India before the 1857 revolt. Now see what changed after the 1857 revolt. The 1857 mutiny, revolt, or it is also called as the First War of Indian Independence, marked the British's farewell to some of these Indian customs and a revival of English customs. After the mutiny, hookahs lost their charms. The picture on the left shows a British Mem Sahib or an English lady who has decorated her home in British style. A shift towards a more refined aesthetics than the savage aesthetic of pre-1857. The only giveaway is the Indian pankha here. So you see at the top there is an Indian pankha, otherwise this looks like a picture of an English home. Both the mutiny and the completion of the Suez Canal in 1869 ensured the arrival of more English women to India, who brought English customs and Victorian morality. And the result of their appearance was very well captured by Byron Farwell, who writes, and this is the quotation from him, that is how English marmalade appeared and how things changed. Now, what I have argued so far, that it leads to an English nostalgia, and to attend to this nostalgia, English style professional theatres emerged, and one of them was Corinthian Theatre, created after converting the stables, the horse stables of Smith and Company. The theatre was built right at the center of the White Town. So you see here in this picture, behind somewhere 2 blocks down the church, the Sacred Heart Church, there is a theatre, okay, and that theatre is Corinthian Theatre. And now this is how it looks like. This picture was taken a couple of years back. Now, of course, nothing exists anymore. Corinthian Theatre is gone, okay, but this is how this particular 5 Dharamtala road looks like now. The theatre was built right at the center of the White Town and its bazaar. White Town refers to that part of Calcutta inhabited mainly by Europeans because of its proximity to Fort William. Theatre critic Anandalal informed me that this area was a stone's throw from the fort, this area where the Corinthian Theatre was built. Barely 10 minutes horse ride. Not only Corinthian was located in the bazaar, but in general, the theatre space of colonial Indian cities resembled a market where many different performance practices were showcased. Now let me show you one advertisement, and this is the first advertisement in the history of Corinthian Theatre. What is significant about these new establishments was their gaze, which was not inward anymore. So it's not like towards India, but towards Britain, but outward towards the motherland, Great Britain. This advertisement from the 1874-75 season, the first season in the history of the Corinthian Theatre, shows this gaze towards Britain. As the advertisement reads, I quote, "The directors have much pleasure in announcing that the company from London," now no more Indian companies, but the companies from London will be invited, "accompanied by Mr. English, will shortly arrive." To contextualize, I have argued so far that there was a massive demand for professional English theatres in India after 1869. The Achurch-Charrington company responded to this demand and the urge for what was considered fashionable in Britain by bringing Ibsen to India. Despite this huge demand for European productions, Ibsen's aesthetics could not find a home in the peripheral space of British India for 3 reasons. First, competition with theatrical and non-theatrical shows, absence of an India-centric entertainment model, and the third one is audiences' inability to understand Ibsen's aesthetics. So now I come to the second part, and I call the second part as supply, because there is a huge demand. Now you have to supply something. Okay, so supply. First, in 1891, when the Charringtons arrived in India, metropolitan centers were simply overdone with shows. Unluckily, the Charringtons had to compete with many such international troupes for financial success during their stay in India. One such show was Tom Cannon's boxing or wrestling exhibitions. The spectacular drama of wrestling matches worked splendidly for audiences in British India, and that's why Tom Cannon's wrestling match exhibitions succeeded in capturing both Anglo-European and native audiences' attention. On December 14, 1891, the Hindu Patriot, this is the name of a newspaper, like many other newspapers such as Times of India, advertised the news about the British wrestler Tom Cannon the champion wrestler of the world. I'm quoting from the newspaper, the champion wrestler of the world, who is visiting India. While this kind of news item was a common feature in Calcutta, the bustling capital of British India, what made it interesting was Cannon's grandiloquent announcement, according to which, I quote, "He is prepared to wrestle any man in India, native or European, in any style, and as there are a number of excellent wrestlers in the native community," unquote. The grandiloquent announcement and the prize money of rupees 1,000 transformed these wrestling match exhibitions into what Roland Barthes calls, I quote, "a spectacle of excess." The spectacle reached its pinnacle during Cannon's match with the native wrestler Karim Bucks, to whom Cannon lost. Not surprisingly, Cannon's loss did not register well with the European audiences. Questioning Bucks' win, the Hindu Patriot of December 28, 1891 notes, I quote, "As might be expected, imputations of unfair play and so on were made by some of the European spectators, consequent upon so signal a defeat of their champion." Now this is one. Now another company that was there in India was Thomas Hudson's surprise party. Besides Cannon's exhibition, two other traveling troupes that captured Indian market's attention around the time when the Achurch-Charrington company arrived. One was the Hudson surprise party and the phonograph. Second one was the phonograph. Thomas Hudson's variety entertainers were in India when the Charringtons arrived. Some of the performers who graced the company's surprise party were Nellie Arline, the unrivaled lady banjoist, the Permans, the clever acrobats, and Lily Linton, a dancer and the veteran, Thomas himself. The performers, referred to as the Congress of Stars, offered all the latest novelties, such as the delights, I quote, "such as the delights of mellifluous melody blended with the charm of elegant song and dance," unquote. Audiences in India celebrated and welcomed the company for providing a complete package consisting of comedy, magic, dance, song, and acrobatics. The company also managed to get royal patronage, such as Lord George Harris, Lord George Harris's. Now the last company, starting in December 1891, Professor Douglas Archibald started demonstrating Edison-style slender phonographs. He entertained the audiences in India by exposing them to the miraculous invention of sound recording technology through his phonograph exhibitions. One reviewer observed that the audiences who went to, I quote, "see a scientific curiosity were not disappointed," unquote. These exhibitions, termed recitals, consisted of Archibald's lecture illustrated by diagrams, athrogen light effects, and reproductions of the human voice, a Salvation Army band, and best of all, of the familiar strains of some Bengali prima donna songs using Thomas Edison's talking machine. So you see that what kind of a theatre companies or what kind of a show business was going on in Calcutta at the time when the AC company arrived. And this was not over. The AC company's arrival in India during Christmas festivities further compounded its problems. Amidst Christmas festivities in India, Ibsen's dissemination was tricky. The newspaper pioneer delineated that audiences in Calcutta won't be the right frame of mind to understand the merits of Ibsen's play, and argued that, and this is the quote from the newspaper, let me read it, to ask a Calcutta audience on the evening of the Cup Day to watch the development of a psychological problem such as Ibsen revels in was a little cruel. And if some of the well-dressed crowd occupying every seat in the stalls and dress circle and surging over into the lobbies felt the final dialogue, which closes with the sonorous slam of the street door as Nora leaves her husband and her doll's house, a whit tedious. The weariness which comes after a long day's racing should be held partly accountable. So you see, having outlined the fierce competition the AC company had to face in British India, in the paragraphs to follow, I demonstrate how AC company's inability to utilize their Ibsen-specific business model hampered Ibsen's dissemination in India. Charringtons found this model in Australia, and it helped them run a successful Ibsen campaign in Australia and New Zealand. Their business model focused on generating beneficial public opinion through theatre soirees, charitable work, recruitment of the local talents, and Ibsen lectures. Jürgen Habermas, in his book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, explains how, with the spread of capitalism in the 18th century, print culture flourished, turning family rooms into salons or extra familiar socializing spaces for intimate discussions with friends in family and society, books and art. The family room, I quote Habermas, became a reception room where private people gathered to form a public, unquote. Although Habermas mostly stressed print culture in the 18th century, one can extend his argument to performance, play reading and theatre lectures within the context of Ibsen in 19th century colonial spaces. The AC Company encouraged the practice of informal conversations and social gatherings. Achurch started a new theatre trend in Australia in these gatherings. She began, I quote, a series of afternoon teas, unquote. Although Genevieve Ward, an American actress, was the first one to introduce the fashion to Australian audiences, Achurch continued the tradition. These conversations helped create a nostalgic bridge of familiarity between the company and other European officials in the alien environment of the colony, offering respite from colonial exhaustion. These salons or family houses played a crucial role in deciding the production success or failure. They provided us with an insight into a concept of imperial power and how it changes in the colony. The idea of Ibsen originated in Europe, but it was appropriated at these centers in the colony. Undoubtedly, the AC Company's London success with Ibsen played a vital role in securing invitations to many of these family rooms. But the company's business model, promoting deliberate and consistent endeavors to socialize with the locals, helped further. In Australia, to support a ladies' college, Achurch did a benefit production of a doll's house. The AC Company had a splendid house and thus materially benefited the college. The AC Company followed the same tactics in Ceylon. So before they came to India, they went to Ceylon and then they came to India, to Calcutta. The company accepted the invitation of tea planters who could not attend the production because of the heavy rain. These meetings helped the AC Company in managing and directing public opinion. The AC Company also encouraged the participation of local talents to maintain friendly public opinion. Two actors who joined the company in Australia and travelled to India were Herbert Fleming and Ida Herbert. Fleming, a London-born actor whose name was a household word in theatre circus in Australia, took up the charge of business manager in India, while Ida Herbert, a Tasmanian-born actor, entered into an engagement with Miss Achurch's company to play second parts and understudy all Miss Achurch's characters. Another method devised by the AC Company in Australia and New Zealand to build public opinion in their favor was to project themselves as Ibsen experts. Charrington delivered lectures explaining the nuances of Ibsen to his audiences. These lectures also helped create the right environment to understand the nuances of Ibsen's aesthetics. In the absence of these lectures in colonial India, it was difficult for audiences to celebrate the noble poetics of Ibsen. Discussing this aspect, one of the reviewers mentions that, I quote, few of them, that is the audiences in India, have read the play itself, much less studied the subtleties of the plot, and hence they find it difficult to grasp the true meaning of the author, unquote. All these activities came together to generate approving press coverage, which further helped the AC Company to have a financial successful business in Australia and New Zealand. In 19th century India, it was a well-known fact that the company's success was hugely dependent on how it navigated the social space. George Milne, an American tragedian, and he was there at the time when the AC Company was in India, maintained the delicate balance between the two that helped him with a satisfactory attendance of the audience. Mill accomplished this by organizing a competition among junior schoolboys for the prize edition of Shakespeare. Mill also played the role of Shylock for 2 nights and Bassanio on 1 night in The Merchant of Venice, performed at the Novelty Theatre on the 13th, 16th and 19th February 1892 to support the Homes for Poor Parsis, the Alexander Native Girls English Institution and the Leper Asylum. So you see how important it is to integrate your theatre company into the social space of the 19th century India. Half of the proceeds of these productions by George Mill went to charity, while the other half was handed over to him. The company hired local, in India this is what the AC company did, they hired local amateur players while traveling in India. But these players, rather than helping the company to generate more revenue or integrate themselves into the Indian environment, tired the company as the professional actors had to work with them all the time to prepare them for performances. The rehearsals with amateurs became more complicated in India because of the shorter duration of their stay. Well, the same problem did not arise when they were in Australia, but in India it arose. However, their short stay in India did not allow them to institutionalize their business model, leading to Ibsen's rejection. Moreover, in the absence of sufficient literature, Ibsen's aesthetics surfaced as a puzzle for audiences in India. After the AC Company's first production of Ibsen in Calcutta on December 26, 1891. Since only a few members of the audience for the Calcutta production had read the play itself, much less studied the subtleties of the plot, they found Ibsen's aesthetics confusing. The absence of proper training and previous knowledge worsened the situation, as audiences in India, I quote, did not seem quite sure what it all meant, that is what this production all meant, unquote. Australian audiences found themselves in the same situation when, after the production of Hedda Gabler, the female protagonist was called, I quote, as loathsome as Frankenstein's monster, unquote, and the play was considered irredeemably dull, unquote. But the consistent efforts of the AC Company succeeded in changing Ibsen's reputation in Australia. Since, unlike Australian audiences in India never got an opportunity to be taught the nuances of Ibsen, they found it harder to appreciate Ibsen's aesthetics. Although reviews of the Calcutta production of A Doll's House, such as by the Englishman, the name of the newspaper, reminded readers that Ibsen's drama must be regarded, I quote, as a thing apart and be judged on its own merits without regard to any of the canons of everyday dramatic criticism, unquote, it did not work out. Ibsen's aesthetics continued to puzzle audiences and eventually played a crucial role in India's rejection of Ibsen. Although some reviewers considered the puzzling effect as the combined result of the production's renunciation's emotional intensity, one can identify 3 aspects of this renunciation. They are the production's eschewal of clinically separating the good from the evil as the unscientific sorting of the characters, second, its unconventional ending, and third, its deployment of the melodramatic acting style. In 19th century India, the dominant aesthetics of theatre, as manifested in comedies and melodramas, articulated a clear-cut division between good and evil. These conventional plays did not celebrate the complex game of life with characters in shades of grey. One of the most exploited theatre grams of the period was poetic justice, or what Michael R. Booth calls dream justice, that often stepped in to see the virtuous hero triumphant. In contrast to this tradition of aesthetics, in the AC Company's productions of A Doll's House, audiences in India confronted an unconventional villain who has a sounder prospect of happiness before him than any other character in the play. Bernard Shaw underlines this aspect of Ibsen when he writes that, I quote, "The conflict is not between clear right and wrong, but the question which makes the play interesting is which is the villain and which the hero," unquote. By the play's conclusion, audiences were accustomed to seeing the ideal of virtue triumphing over vice, but in the AC Company's Ibsen production, they encountered two departures. First, the fall of the established ideal of a devoted wife and mother, and the second is the open-ended interrogation manifested on the stage with the slam of the door. Audiences in India, like London audiences, would be confused to see how a devoted wife's love for her husband vanished after 8 years of tender affection. Additionally, they failed to understand how a devoted mother like Nora could leave her children behind. The dominant aesthetics of the time maintained the status quo by insisting that the play must end with a moral that conformed to the ideals of the 19th century. This conformism played a crucial role in the success of the production. For instance, one reviewer informed us that the AC Company's production of the comedy Money Spinner was appreciated more than A Doll's House, probably because, I quote, "it is an emotional play with a moral," unquote. The same pattern surfaces if one looks at the reception of the AC Company's production of Camille. Since Camille's ending agreed with the patriarchal code of morality, the reviews appreciated Achurch. Again I quote, "Her acting has all the elements which make the unfortunate heroine of the old play seem a woman to be pitied and forgiven, rather than scorned and persecuted," unquote. Moreover, like Australian audiences in India would be confused by the open-ended structure of the production. In Australia, the audiences did not realize that the play was over after the departure of Nora, and although, I quote now, "the orchestra played the national anthem twice, the audience still sat on," unquote. Audiences in India were used to grand comedies full of extravaganza. These shows prided themselves in transferring the audiences from their familiar world using extravagant sceneries and draperies. Although the AC Company's production did not transport the audiences to any lavish world, as per the convention of the realist theatre, its picture of Nora Helmer, the plaything wife, who wakes so suddenly to the realities of life, I quote now from a reviewer, was somewhat overcolored. The lights a little too light, the shadows unnecessarily dark. There was also over accentuation in gesture, unquote. Achurch's exaggerated acting resembled the melodramatic acting style of the 19th century and would have certainly puzzled the audiences who saw Ibsen's theatre as antithetical to the conventions of melodrama. Simultaneously, Charrington's characterization had, again I quote a reviewer, "an occasional reminiscence of melodrama in his comedy method," unquote. Reviewing the AC Company's A Doll House, the London production that followed their Indian tour, the reviewer notes, I quote, "The Helmer of Mr. Charrington is too transparent. One can see in 5 minutes that he is a weak, solemn, selfish cad, and the wonder is not that Nora makes up her mind to leave him, but that she had remained with him for 8 years," unquote. Rather than offering a melodramatic stock character, the character of Helmer, as shown in Ibsen's play, should evolve as his selfishness must become apparent to Nora gradually. So this is what I have found in my research. So this chapter has presented a significant point of departure from existing studies on Ibsen's dissemination in India by reading it within the context of British travelling troops in colonial India. I have shown that despite the demand for English theatre troops in India, 3 factors restrained Ibsen's dissemination in British India. First, the theatre troupe of British India hampered Ibsen's dissemination. Second, the AC Company's inability to institutionalize its successful Australian business model in India prevented its Ibsen campaign. Finally, the audience's incompetence in solving the puzzle of Ibsen's aesthetics impeded Ibsen's espousal in India. Despite these challenges, it won't be wrong to suggest that the AC company created the first variant of Ibsen's in India. This variant differed radically from the company's 1889 production in London because of the Charrington's shift from the realistic, natural acting to the melodramatic style. It is crucial to note that creating an Indian variant of Ibsen in British India challenged the normative discourse, and this is the normative discourse. That is, London served as the center where the imaginative work of theatre making was undertaken. The Indian variant, though different from what Ibsen imagined, continued to rule the imagination of the people until the subsequent production of Henrik Ibsen in British India. Thank you.